they're thwarting that a little bit, aren't they? It's that damn virus. But I think we're kind of in this for the long haul, so we're gonna do what we can to bring people some good content and have some good conversations. So with that,
one good thing is that people are reading and buying books. We have more time to read, and I think publishers have been, after the initial scare, publishers, booksellers, writers, we have realized that we're still selling a lot of books. People are reading, so that could be a good thing.
It is a good thing. I know that, like, for me personally, I don't know about you, but the first few weeks, it was like I couldn't concentrate to save my life on reading.
I found it to be very distracting as a reader. I was able to continue writing every day because I start that early in the morning and kind of go into a zone and get that done before anything else happens. But, once you come out of the little cocoon there and see the world, see the news and talk to people and realize, there's a lot of fear, a lot of uncertainty. And again, it was very distracting initially and still can be, but I managed to put that aside and disappear into a great novel, just somebody else's fictional world.
Agreed. And that's for me too. And it's, I think now, as we're kind of hitting our stride in this thing, I think we all have to realize how we're going to live with this.
Yes.
And so we've got to be able to, we're not going back to any kind of that, whatever that normal was before. So we've got to figure out how we're going to go through this.
Yeah.
So with that, let's talk about this.
Okay.
Let's talk about, so I went back because I have a distinct memory of reading for the first time A Time to Kill, and that opening scene. And I remember it back whenever. So I was like, okay, I'm going to go back and reread that and see if it's still as good as I remember it being. And boy, is it. I mean, that is just a visceral, just an amazing. Oh, and to think that was your debut just blows my mind. But 30 years later, you still got it.
That's good. That's good to hear.
So let's set up, because I know that everybody knows a lot about A Time to Kill. So let's talk about and let's set up A Time for Mercy and tell us about what that's all about.
Well, after A Time to Kill was published in 1989, the book didn't sell. It was a total flop initially. A small unknown publisher in New York, and I was unknown. I was a small town lawyer in Mississippi, and the book came out and vanished. I mean, there was no second printing. There was no talk of a paperback. There was no talk of a movie. Nothing. No foreign sales, and so it got off to a rough start. Later, when the firm came out, 18 months later, there was suddenly a lot of interest in my first book, and it took them a while to scramble around and start printing A Time to Kill, and thankfully they are still printing A Time to Kill. But I waited 24 years before I brought Jake back 7 years ago in Sycamore Row, and it took a long time to find a story. And you got to keep in mind that a small town criminal lawyer anywhere in America is not going to have a big sensational dramatic murder courtroom trial every other year. It just doesn't work that way. So I couldn't have Jake in the courtroom with these big trials all the time. So I kind of put him on the back burner. But when Sycamore Row came out, we were pleasantly surprised at. We knew Jake was popular, but we were surprised at how popular he was. I think it's a combination of Jake, Matthew McConaughey, a very popular movie, my success. But anyway, we were amazed at the numbers that Sycamore Row put up because people loved Jake. And so after that happened, I told myself I'm not going to wait 24 years to bring Jake back. And I immediately began, as I always do, looking for a story, preferably a criminal trial, Jake's courtroom, Jake's in the middle of it, with a set of facts that are very compelling. And I heard the story that was the inspiration for Time for Mercy 3 or 4 years ago, told to me by, told to a lawyer who was making a speech to a group of people. He talked about representing a 16-year-old kid who was charged with murder and how traumatized and abused the boy had been. And it was a real compelling idea. I don't know what happened to the case or the defendant or whatever. And I thought, okay, I finally got a story now. I can put this story in Jake's world and create the kind of drama I want in Clanton, Mississippi, with Jake in the courtroom. And so it just took a while to work out the story. And once I had it all planned, I was ready to go.
Yeah, because that's the thing too that I have to say too. When I was a little taken aback when I started reading it, because it was set in 1990. And for some reason in my brain, when I Time to Mercy, when we were talking about, the next book that was coming out, when we were talking back in May, and you said a new one was coming back, I thought, oh, it's going to be Jake like 30 years later, coming back to save the day, So 1990 it took me a while to kind of put my head in there. So was that a hard thing to put your brain back into 1990 and not bring like technology in? And
yeah, I'm not going to say it was hard, but there were at least 2 times when I had Jake firing off an email. I said, wait a minute, not in 1990.
No.
Or reaching for his cell phone, which we didn't have. We had the early generation of pocket phones in and car phones.
Yeah, because he does have the car phone. And so I kind of did look that up a little bit. I was like, oh yeah, we did have car phones then.
It was the last year I practiced law, 1990. And I remember driving down the Interstate 55 in Mississippi in my little Volvo. For some reason, I have a vivid memory of talking on the car phone. So that was 89 or 90. I don't think we had the pocket phones just then, but they were coming. So anyway, you're right. It's before technology, before the internet.
Right.
That was, it seems like a simpler time now looking back. Communications were not nearly as instantaneous as today, but they were fast enough. We didn't miss anything. You don't miss what you don't have. But and also there's a very crucial reason I set the book in 1990. I don't want Jake to grow up and be as old as I am. he and I are about the same age, but in the story he's 37. So I'm way beyond 37. In 1990, it was not unusual throughout the Death Belt, mainly your southern states and Texas, to put a kid of a 15 or 16-year-old kid on trial for murder. It was not that unusual, capital murder. The Supreme Court stopped that about 10 years ago and said you can't do that anymore. And they also said you can no longer sentence a teenager to life in prison without parole, because that's basically a death sentence. So there are 2 huge Supreme Court decisions that changed the law from 1990. So I wanted to go back to 1990 and put this kid on trial for capital murder. Mm-hmm. And I had to change a few statutes, which I always do. I make up my own rules and laws as I go. But that was one reason I set the book in 1990.
Yeah, because that was it. So I can understand that now, but at the time I was just like, oh, okay. But and putting somebody on trial that young, and it's one of the things that I kind of picked up, and I don't know whether it was a big deal about Drew is obviously what he went through, but the penal system at the time, educating teenagers when you're in that system. Hold on, because my phone's going to keep ringing. live TV. So was that part of so educating Drew was kind of a big thing, and so is that something that wasn't happening back then and is now, or is it still the same that they just don't worry about educating teenagers in the system?
I think all states worry about it, but some states are far more progressive than others, and some states try, others don't when kids are incarcerated. But it's hard to imagine the schools being very good, and education is so crucial to kids, because kids who pull the trigger, like the kids who commit these horrible crimes, the victim is just as dead regardless of how old the killer is. And so you want to help the kid, you want to punish the kid, but a lot of these kids come from abusive environments that they cannot escape. They're easily influenced by older people who are not good influences. Their brains have not fully developed. It's a different, and they are much more easily rehabilitated. So there's a different set of laws and procedures that go into punishing kids. But the book still asks the great question, and I didn't answer it because I don't know the answer. How do you treat a killer like Drew who pulled the trigger because the deceased was just as dead regardless of who, it was a horrible crime scene.
Right.
I make the point under Mississippi law, as in most states, if he had been treated as a juvenile, he would have gone to youth court, been found guilty before a judge, no jury. And at the age of 18, the youth court would lose jurisdiction and he walks out. Well, that's not fair.
Right.
That's not justice. So, those are issues I put in the book and did not provide any answers.
Yeah, well, because it's a tough one. I mean, they're tough ones. We're going to spend a little bit of time on the book and then we'll get to some other things because there's so many good things to talk about. So is this one of your longer books? Because this is a nice slow burn. There's a lot of good characters going on in here. So did COVID have anything to do with this being longer, or?
COVID had a huge impact on the book. Okay. I start writing a book in January of every year. And because January, February, March are great months to write, there's not a whole lot going on. Weather's not good. Can't go outside. So that's when I kind of tuck in and hibernate and really do a lot of writing those months. Then I get out and go somewhere. And, I had 2 or 3 book festivals planned for the fall. One was in France, one was in England, one was in New Orleans. I was going to hit the circuit, and suddenly I couldn't go anywhere. I was just trapped, and still am. And so all I could do was write. And so the book got thicker and thicker. I slowed down. I realized I was not going to be in a big hurry like I usually am. Or not in a hurry. I hate to write in a hurry, but the deadline was not going to be that big of a deal because the deadline is self-imposed. It's always July the 1st. I give myself 6 months, but I suddenly had all this time and I could kind of kick back and, expand on some of the subplots and it became, I think it's the longest book I've ever written. The Time to Kill is probably about the same, but those are the 2 thickest books I've written. In Sycamore Row was also all the books in Ford County the stories take longer to tell down there.
Well, just a little slower, it's just a little slower and got to get which brings up the secondary characters, which there's so many good ones, but the 2 that I absolutely love, and I don't know if they make, is Harry Rex and Tatum. I mean, you got to snicker every time they come on the scene. And does it make, obviously you're writing it, so you must laugh too, but are those fun characters for you to write about? Harry
Rex is the only character I think I've ever written in 40 some odd books that's based on a real person. Oh. And he is a lawyer in the small town where I practiced. And when I wrote that book, I started writing A Time to Kill in 1985. I had never written before. I did not know what I was doing. I didn't know if I was going to finish. And so I borrowed characters and patterned them after real people. And most of them I went back and fixed when I realized the book was going to get published. But Harry Rex stayed true to the real character. And when the book came out, or as we were preparing to publish A Time to Kill, I talked to this friend. I said, look, I got this novel coming out. And there's a character in the novel that's kind of based on you. And I really don't want you to sue me because he's a very good lawyer. And he said, he wrote me a letter. He said, here is my disclaimer. You can write anything, say anything about me you want to say, write anything. I don't care. You can slander me. You can defame me. You can whatever. I don't care. So that's a real character. And he turned into, somebody that we always remember. Lucian is Jake's mentor. Jake's not really his first boss, his only boss. Mm-hmm. And he's a different type of character. You don't see much of him in this book, but when Jake is in trouble, he tends to gravitate toward Lucian's front porch for a drink and some advice. And it's nice to have someone like that in your life.
Yeah, we all need those people advice. Okay, so then we're going to talk about the church ladies, because food actually plays a pretty big role in this too. And I was wondering, it's like, so when you start bringing food in, are you feeling a little hungry? Like you describe a po' boy at one point was like, oh, that sounds really good.
Yeah, I love to do that. I love to write about food. And I wrote a book 10 years ago called Playing for Pizza. Mm-hmm. It was an American football story in Italy. And it's factual situation. And so I had to go to Bologna and Parma, Italy, 3 or 4 times to do research, which meant eat and drink for several days.
Darn it.
And the food, there's so much food in that book, you get hungry just reading it. Yeah, I've done that with several stories because anywhere you go in the world, food's important. But especially I think in small towns where people in 1990 still cooked a lot and treasured old recipes and traditions, and we as a family we still do that.
Right.
We still, my wife has recipes from her grandmother that she will not share with anyone, and so food is important. It's really important around a church for the major events, weddings, but especially funerals. When anybody's in need, that's what a church is for. That's
well, it's the comfort part of it. It's that comfort thing.
So comforting, and that's very much a part of life in the Deep South.
Yeah. In fact, so last time I kind of interwove audience questions, and I'm going to do the same thing this time. And an old high school friend who knew I was doing this, hi Jeff, if you're watching, he asks, because he's a big foodie. So he asks, what your favorite thing is on the menu at Big Bad Breakfast in Oxford, Mississippi. So he said that you might know the chef there, John Currents. Do you ever eat there?
I know John Currents very well. John Currents is a friend of mine. We lived in Oxford in 1991 when John Currents opened the City Grocery, which was the first or second really high-end food, really good food in Oxford, which has become a very good food town. And John Currents has always been on the cutting edge of Southern cuisine, and he's written books and articles. Anyway, he's a rock star. He opened Big Bad Breakfast 15 years ago. What a name for a cafe! And the menu is just dripping in grease and calories, and it's not so good. My favorite is he does a homemade biscuits with tomato gravy. If you've never had tomato gravy, I've only had it like 4 or 5 times in my life because you really can't handle too much of it. It's just it's delicious. It's too good to be true, but it's very rich. It's greasy. It's gravy, and it's got tomatoes, and that over his biscuits are something you should enjoy at least once in your life, and once is probably enough.
Okay, so I'm driving with my daughter from Nashville, I'm driving her back to California. We're driving through Memphis, so I'm thinking that might have to be a stop for us on the way.
You know what? It'd be great to go to Oxford and hang out on the square. Go to Square Books.
Yeah.
My favorite bookstore in the world is still Square Books in Oxford. I consider that to be my home store. I did a Zoom there last week, and I signed books for them all the time, and have many fond memories of hanging out at the bookstore. My first signing for A Time to Kill in 1989, my first bookstore signing was at Square Books. And there's a lot of great restaurants around the square, and visit Faulkner's home. It's a great place to go by and see. So it's worth the side trip.
Worth the side trip. Okay, so where am I now on my questions here? So we've kind of gone through. I think we've covered the book pretty well, I think, but we still have some things that we need to talk about. So yesterday I was talking with Carol, and I don't know if you're watching, Carol, but she goes, "Oh, you have to bring up Matthew." I said, "Oh no, I'm going to talk about Matthew, Jake, and John." And then it sounded very biblical when I said it that way. So,
Jacob from the Old Testament. Yeah, sure.
Matthew, Jake, and John. Tell people that, some people who are watching might know the story, but for those that don't, it's a great story about how Matthew kind of came into this, and he's really become Jake in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Joel Schumacher directed The Client in Memphis in 1994, I think it was. And we got to know Joel pretty well and became friends. And Joel really wanted to direct A Time to Kill, which I had not sold for film. And he kept bugging me about, A Time to Kill. So finally I said yes, and we signed a deal with the Warner Brothers, and they're off and running. And Joel, being Joel, he put together a wonderful cast: Samuel Jackson and Kiefer Sutherland and Donald Sutherland and Sandra Bullock and Ashley Judd, Oliver Platt. I mean, it was just a wonderful cast. And Akiva Goldsman wrote the script. It was a great script. Big budget. The budget didn't matter. They were going to do a great movie. And they were on location in Canton, Mississippi, not Clanton, Mississippi. Clanton is fictional, but just north of Jackson. And they were there on the set, ready to film, and they did not have Jake. They had been through several big names, and for some reason we couldn't get Joel couldn't get the ones he wanted, which he usually could. And we're getting down to the deadline to start filming, and there was no star. And I had contractually maintained the right to veto casting for Jake, and it was in the contract. And things got pretty tense. The lawyers got involved. Joel mentioned a couple of guys that were well known. I just could not see them in a Southern courtroom, the coat and tie on, trying to fake a Southern accent. I just could. I didn't like that. So I vetoed a couple. And everybody's yelling, and all of a sudden Joel, being Joel, said, "Time out." He said, "I have an idea." He said, "Have you seen a movie called Dazed and Confused?" And I said, "I missed that one." He said, "There's a guy in the movie I really like." And so Matthew, I think, was on set somewhere else, and Joel pulled him in to LA for a screen test. And this is back in 1995. So before the internet, so we didn't have instant videos. They sent me the old VHF cassette tape, big tape. Mm-hmm. FedExed it to us of Matthew's screen test. And Renee and I were waiting at the door, FedEx, things are kind of urgent. And we're hoping he's great. And we popped that thing in the VCR, and there's Matthew talking to the camera, doing the closing argument, smoking a cigar. And when Renee first saw him, she said, "I think I'm in love." I said, "So
Renee's got good taste."
She said, "So you vote yes?" She said, "I'm voting yes." And so we went to screen test, and we said, "That's him. That's Jake." Yep. And so Joel and I then called Matthew and said, "Hey, you want to play Jake?" And he said, "I'm there." He took off to Mississippi, and the rest is history.
The rest is history. Yeah. Because I was kidding with Todd earlier today. I said, if Matthew wanted to Zoom bomb us today, I wouldn't kick him out of the waiting room.
He's got a book coming out.
Yeah, I think you guys are doing something. Not that I'm stalking you or anything, John, but I think you guys have an event tonight with him together, right?
I hope it's not tonight. I think it may be next week.
Oh, never mind.
I lost track of my Zoom tour. But yeah. We did a thing. What did we do? We did a book thing a couple of weeks ago. I've kind of lost track, but yeah. We have recontacted after 25 years of no contact. And when they make these movies, and this goes back to the early and mid 1990s, we would go to the set and we would hang out for half a day, take the kids, have lunch, meet everybody. Everybody's real nice, and then we go back home. Yeah. And they finish the movie and they go back home to wherever they live. And it's been impossible over the years to maintain any kind of correspondence because the job's done. You're not gonna be around them. You're not gonna hang out. So you lose track of them pretty fast. And that happened with Matthew. And it was sure nice hooking up with him recently and having a conversation. He's a great guy.
Yeah, no, that must be. So now obviously his voice wasn't in your head when you wrote A Time to Kill, but for Sycamore Row, he's obviously in all of our heads when we read Jake now. I mean, that's who we hear. When you write him in like Sycamore Row and A Time for Mercy, do you kind of have his voice in there a little bit?
Not really. I'm not sure I hear his voice. When I'm writing the dialogue or writing about what he's thinking, I try not to include anybody, not myself, not someone who's been in the movie. I try to shut that out.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's but for us, it's like Matthew's in there. We're hearing Matthew. Okay. So everybody loves to talk about the writing process, and you kind of tell us, you've told us in January through July you do that. So, but now it's October. So are you writing? What are you doing now? Are you writing now, or?
I finished A Time for Mercy around July the 1st. And that's a deadline that I give Doubleday each year. Every January, I talk to Doubleday, and we decide if there's going to be a book that year. And so far, we've always said yes. There's not been a year without a book, and so I'll say it'll be there July the 1st. And I'm always close to July 1st. I've even been a week early. So that's a very important deadline. And so I start to work in January, and like I said, work hard through the winter.
Mm-hmm.
I turn the book in around July the 1st. It takes about 6 weeks of editing, polishing, stuff like that. Then they go to press, and I'll take off life slows down considerably in the summertime, and we really enjoy summertime.
Mm-hmm.
And then invariably by Labor Day, I'm bored, and I start writing something else.
Okay.
Whether it's a kid's book or whether it's a standalone sports book, or I've written 2 football books and a baseball book, some short stories. I've published 1 volume of short stories. I probably will not do that again.
Okay, so that was somebody's question. They wanted to know if you were going to go back to the Ford County short stories.
I don't know. Those stories were hanging around for years, and I finally, fixed them all up and published them. I don't really have any more short stories. I just keep hanging around. I have a lot of ideas for novels that
Mm-hmm.
I go back and tinker with when I'm bored, but I'm not a short story guy. I don't read them much, and I just actually they're too long to be short stories. They're like mini novels, and with beginning, middle, plot, ending, and that kind of stuff. So I'm not really a short story writer, but so in the fall, I get bored and start writing something else.
Yeah. So talking about baseball and there's a lot of in your baseball books. So how did you like the baseball abbreviated season that they did? Did you get into it at all?
No.
Yeah.
No, I didn't. I just didn't get into it. Difficult watching the games when the stadiums are empty. I watched a couple innings last night. I love Clayton Kershaw,
Mm-hmm.
and I watched the Dodgers last night, and they're playing in Texas.
Right.
Stadium looked pretty good. I mean, there were people there, which is bothersome, but they you hope they were being safe and all that. It's just nice having people there to make noise. But
because that fake noise, that's what killed me. It's like Fox was putting in that fake noise. I told my husband, I was like, turn it off. That was horrible. So so Calico Joe, I know there's some news about that. And so I know people will probably be very interested because this is a great story. So tell us about the news about Calico Joe and what's happening with that.
It happened on a Saturday afternoon back in the summertime. And by the way, weekends don't matter anymore. Every day is pretty much the same now. They kind of blur together, and because you're not going to the office. And my phone rang. It was my agent calling from New York. David Gurnett and I have been together for 30 years. He was my first. He bought the firm as an editor at Doubleday in January of 1990. So we go back that far. He then became my agent, but he still edits all my stuff. And we talk almost every day. And he called Saturday afternoon and said, "Hey, I just talked to a company that wants to adapt Calico Joe. We've already been through at least 2 projects with Calico Joe, 2 deals that didn't work out, and the option expired, and I got the rights back, so I've got the rights." And he said, "You're never going to guess who wants to buy Calico Joe and make a movie." And I said, "Surprise me." He said, "Bob Dylan."
I know, it's so crazy.
I said, "I thought he was a singer."
Exactly.
He likes to dabble in film. And I said, "Well, that sounds great to me. Yes, let's sell the thing to Bob Dylan."
Right.
And nobody at the time, nobody else wanted it, so we said go. And he read the book when it came out years ago and really liked it. And when he called the first time, I didn't even know it, but the rights were not available.
Okay.
So he went away and he came back, and he just loves Calico Joe. So evidently he does not waste time. And so before we knew it, he had contacted George Clooney to produce, direct, and I think write the screenplay. George said yes. And we all signed a contract that was announced last week. It was Bob Dylan, George Clooney, John Grisham, all,
Wow.
to make Calico Joe. I said, it's a pretty good lineup.
That's a good, kind of Matthew, Jake, and John. We got George, John, and Bob. That's another good combo.
I have not talked to George in a long time. I have never talked to Bob Dylan, but I'm just hoping he gets made,
Yeah.
They got to do it. And I tell people all the time when these deals are announced, I always say, I'll believe it when they start filming. Because when they start filming, the money is committed.
I was just going to say, the money's there.
And they're spending money like crazy, and it's going to be a movie.
Yeah, because you just don't ever know. And back to something you said a minute ago too, with like your ideas for and we're going to run out of time here in a little bit. I could talk to you probably for another hour. We're going to run out of time, so I got to get all my questions in. You were talking about your ideas for like novels. So do you ever drop any ideas? Like in this one, there were a couple of people that it was like, oh, I'd like to hear more about like Porsha, for example. Is Porsha going to come back?
I sure hope so. Porsha appeared in Sycamore Row and found a following, and there's more of her in A Time for Mercy. She's this 26-year-old African-American girl from Clanton who's headed off to law school when the story ends at Ole Miss, and her goal is to come back to Clanton and be the first Black female lawyer in town. And she wants to spend her career helping poor people, helping her people. Yeah. And so that's a great setup. And yeah. Jake's already offered her a job. Jake just adores the girl, and they're big buddies. And so she wants to come back to Clanton, and there's a lot of potential there.
Yeah, lots of potential. Because as I was reading, I was like, oh, we could go. There's a lot of things that we could talk about there. So good to know that she might be back. Maybe she's got her own little novel coming up. So, oh boy, what do I pick to talk about next? I'll go to an audience question because this one's pretty good. And it's a double question. So in 2013, this person said he watched an interview that said you watched the quote circus in Washington, D.C., and that there's a good political novel that you'd love to write but haven't found the story yet. So this is back in 13. We're going to say Washington's always been a little bit of a circus. So do you have is there a storyline? And then another person asked, would you write a book with a president as a main character?
I cannot. I've never visualized a novel with the president as a main character. The idea may happen, next year, but not now. The political novel is something I've thought about for a long time, and I just can't get. I can't get the story together. It's about the. I read a story a long time ago about a guy in Washington who's, I guess, the biggest lobbyist in Washington. And the story was very slanted, not praising him and not condemning him, but just said, this guy he's just a lobbyist, but he's the most powerful guy in town because politicians come and go, presidents come and go. This guy stays right here making a fortune every year, and he controls a lot of stuff and a lot of legislation. He's got the big money. And I thought that would be a pretty good starting point for a novel to have that character in the center. But, I'm not sure it's going to be something that you really want to read about. I mean, you got to have a good guy somewhere in the story. Right. So that's been rattling around for a long time, and long before 2016. Yeah. And I'm sure it's got a ways to go before I find the story.
Yeah, because probably, we won't get political. It's hard to find the good guy characters in Washington. I'm sure there's some. Okay, so just a few more minutes here. Real quick, it's the kind of the Halloween season, and I always like a good creepy story. Hopefully you have one. So I know you live on a farm out in the middle. So is there anything creepy or weird or spooky that's ever happened to you on the farm or your family or anything? Any good creepy kind of things happen out there?
Well, we have our own cemetery.
Coach.
The house dates back to 17. There was some kind of a structure on our farm they're paying taxes in 1745. The main house was built around 1850, so it's got a lot of age on it. And for 25 years, we've been, pampering this thing, and my wife, it's her favorite project. We have a cemetery out back with tombstones. It's where the Harris family, the people who built the plantation, lived and died. And But we've had Halloween parties next to the cemetery at night, telling scary stories and all that kind of stuff. The main house that we live in was built by slaves. It was all built by slaves,
Mm-hmm.
and they lived in the basement. And I'm sure that they died there.
Mm-hmm.
And so my wife is a big believer in spirits and ghosts, and she is convinced that our house is full of them, and they're all, thank God, nice people. They don't bother anybody. But yeah, there's a lot of potential for my wife's current project. About 6 months ago, she has hired some archaeologists to dig into the history of our farm,
Mm-hmm.
and she has already found the name of about 35 people who were enslaved and some of their relatives who still live nearby. Her goal is to dig and discover all that we can, and then at some point in time, hopefully the next few years, have a ceremony and a plaque and invite these people to come at least and pay honor to what
Wow.
their ancestors did as slaves. So and there are several farms doing that around here in Virginia now. People are really, focused on this issue now. The University of Virginia just opened a brand new monument to the enslaved people who built the university. And we're going to see more and more of that. And I think it's a good thing. I sure hope so.
Oh, yeah. I hope so
But
too, yeah.
because of that, we're convinced that we have ghosts and spirits all over the farm.
Love it. No, I love the spooky stuff, especially this time of year. It's just like, oh, it kind of shocked me with the fact that there was a cemetery on there. I was like, oh, this is getting a little more spooky than that. So I think we're out of time. I would love to talk to you for longer. It's just that this is just something that you got to come back.
Okay, I promise. I'll be back virtually. Maybe I'll be there live in person one day.
I hope so. We would love to have you live in person. So John Grisham, Time for Mercy. We have signed copies while they last. So I didn't do a big intro because if people don't know who you are by now, they might be living under a rock. If they don't know how to order a book from us by now, they might be living under a rock. So John, it's always so great having you. Thank you so much.
Always a pleasure. See you next time.
Thank you. Okay. Thanks, John. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.